Eastern France. The morning fog hangs low over the rolling fields near Ericourt. Damp earth clings to steel tracks. Visibility is barely a few hundred meters. Engines idle in the mist, deep mechanical breathing in the gray silence. Inside a German command vehicle, officers of the 5th Panzer Army study their maps. Reports from forward scouts suggest only a thin American. Screen ahead, scattered tanks from the U.S. 4th Armored Division. A small force, exposed, vulnerable, one commander peers through field glasses into the haze. A handful of silhouettes sit along a distant ridge, Shermans, too few to matter. The German counteroffensive in Lorraine is meant to restore momentum, to prove that German armored power still dominates the battlefield. Confidence is not in short supply. Then, through the fog, more engine noise begins to rise. Not one tank. Not two. But many shapes materialize where there had been nothing. And in that moment, the assumptions of the morning begin to dissolve, just as the larger struggle for France is entering a dangerous new phase. By September 1944, the war in Western Europe had changed shape with stunning speed. Just 3 months earlier, Allied forces had fought their way ashore in Normandy. The landings of June 6 had shattered Hitler's Atlantic Wall, and by late July the American breakout at St. Lay had torn open the German front. The rapid advance that followed, known as the Race Across France, sent U.S. armored divisions, surging eastward at a pace few planners had imagined possible. Among them was the U.S. 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General John S. Wood, a leader known for speed, aggression, and initiative. His division had spearheaded advances across Brittany and into central France, often outpacing supply lines, relying on mobility and surprise. But by early September, momentum slowed. Fuel shortages plagued the Allied advance. The Red Ball Express kept trucks moving day and night, yet gasoline remained precious. Armored units that had raced across open country now found themselves halting for want of fuel. And ahead lay Lorraine. Lorraine was not the open countryside of western France. Narrow roads and small villages clustered along shallow valleys. For any force seeking to advance toward Germany's western frontier, Lorraine was a gateway and a barrier. Adolf Hitler understood its importance after the catastrophic defeat in Normandy and the destruction of much of Germany's armored strength in the Falaise pocket. Berlin demanded a counterstroke. The Western Front needed stabilization, not just defensively, but offensively. German command believed that the American advance had overextended itself. Thin lines, exhausted units, fuel shortages. A window of vulnerability. Thus, the German High Command ordered the reconstitution of armored strength in the region. Newly formed Panther brigades, equipped with one of Germany's most formidable tanks, were rushed into Lorraine. These units were often assembled quickly, sometimes with limited training cohesion. The Panther tank was no light opponent. With its long 75mm gun and thick, sloped frontal armor, it could outgun and outmatch the standard American M4 Sherman at long range. German doctrine emphasized striking hard and exploiting tactical advantage through concentrated armor. Opposing them, American armored divisions operated differently. The U.S. approach relied on combined arms integration, tanks working closely with infantry, artillery, tank destroyers, and air support. The Sherman, though mechanically reliable and fast, was not designed for one-on-one duels with Panthers. Instead, American doctrine emphasized maneuver, communication, and overwhelming firepower through coordination. Yet, in mid-September 1944, much of that coordination was strained. The 3rd U.S. Army under General George S. Patton had driven hard into eastern France. But Patton's advance toward the German border stalled as logistics tightened and resistance stiffened. German forces regrouped along defensive lines east of Nancy. Weather conditions began to shift. Planned a deliberate armored counterattack. Their objective was clear: strike the exposed elements of the American advance, destroy forward armored units, and restore a coherent defensive line. The Americans, meanwhile, believed they were pressing a retreating enemy. Reconnaissance reports suggested German forces were disorganized and withdrawing. Patrols encountered resistance, but nothing indicating a large-scale armored concentration. The assumption grew that any German counterattack would be limited, perhaps symbolic. That assumption would not survive contact with reality because while American units held thin screening positions near the village of Ericourt, German armored columns were assembling only miles away, engines silent. Orders issued in hushed voices, maps studied under dim light. The stage was set for a confrontation neither side fully understood, and as dawn approached on September 18, 1944, the fog over Lorraine concealed far more than terrain. The German counterstroke in Lorraine did not emerge from strength. It was born from urgency. In August 1944, the collapse of German forces in Normandy had been devastating. Entire armored formations were destroyed or abandoned during the retreat through the Falaise Gap. Thousands of vehicles were lost. Experienced crews were killed or captured. The Wehrmacht in the West was a shadow of the force that had once swept across Europe. Yet Hitler demanded action. He believed the American advance had outrun its supply lines. Intelligence suggested thin screening forces across broad fronts. The German high command calculated that a sharp, concentrated armored blow could rupture the American line, recapture key ground, and force a pause in the Allied drive toward the German frontier. The responsibility for this effort fell to General Hasso von Manteuffel. Commander of the 5th Panzer Army, Manteuffel was a capable and experienced armored officer. He understood maneuver warfare. He also understood the limits of what he had been given. Newly formed Panther brigades, including the 111th and 113th, arrived in Lorraine during early September. On paper, they looked formidable, dozens of Panther tanks supported by mechanized infantry and artillery. In reality, many of these formations were hastily assembled. Maintenance teams were stretched thin, fuel stocks were limited. But the Panther itself remained a powerful weapon. Its long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 gun could penetrate an American M4 Sherman at distances beyond 1,500 meters under ideal conditions. Its sloped frontal armor made it difficult to defeat from the front. In open terrain, with clear lines of sight, Panthers could dominate. Lorraine, however, was rarely ideal. The region's gently rolling hills restricted visibility. Villages, hedgerows, and small woodlots broke up lines of fire. And as September progressed, weather became a decisive factor. Morning fog often reduced visibility to less than 200 meters. Ground moisture turned fields slick beneath heavy steel tracks. These environmental factors would shape the coming battle as much as armor thickness or gun caliber. On the American side, Major General John S. Wood commanded the 4th Armored Division under the umbrella of the U.S. Third Army. Wood was aggressive, demanding, and committed to momentum. His division had become one of Patton's spearheads. Yet by mid-September, the tempo had slowed. Supply shortages forced pauses. Artillery units rationed ammunition. Air support, so decisive during the breakout from Normandy, was increasingly limited by weather. The autumn skies over Lorraine were unreliable. Low clouds grounding fighter bombers that had previously suppressed German armor with relative freedom. The 4th Armored Division was deployed in a series of advanced positions east of Nancy, screening broad sectors near villages such as Ericourt, Lezy, and Juvilliers. These forward elements were not arranged as a dense defensive wall. They were spread out, mobile, relying on patrols and rapid reinforcement if necessary. It was precisely this thin deployment that German planners interpreted as weakness. German reconnaissance detected isolated American tank companies occupying ridgelines and crossroads. From a distance, they appeared exposed. The opportunity seemed clear: strike fast, overwhelm local resistance, and roll up the American flank before reinforcements could arrive. But American doctrine did not rely on static lines. Radio communication within U.S. armored units was efficient and widespread. Shermans might appear isolated, but they were rarely unsupported for long. Artillery observers traveled with forward elements. Tank destroyer battalions remained nearby. Reserve armor could maneuver quickly over interior roads. The Americans also possessed one advantage the Germans underestimated: flexibility in fog. Where German doctrine often emphasized deliberate positioning and coordinated massed attacks, American crews had grown accustomed to fluid movement. In limited visibility, smaller, decentralized units could adapt faster than large armored columns trying to maintain formation. Still, On the evening of September 18, 1944, none of that was fully visible to the men preparing for combat. German tank crews sat beside their Panthers, engines checked, ammunition loaded. Orders emphasized surprise and aggression. They would advance at first light, push through the American screen, and restore the initiative in Lorraine. Across the mist-covered ridges, American tankers from the 4th Armored Division cleaned optics, checked radios, and scanned the horizon. Some suspected a counterattack. Others believed the Germans were retreating deeper toward the Moselle. Between these two assumptions lay only fog dot, and when dawn broke on September 19th, both sides would discover how fragile their expectations truly were, because the battle about to unfold would challenge doctrine, confidence, and command on both sides of the line. Inside every tank at Ericourt were men barely out of adolescence, American. Some had landed in France only months earlier. They had driven hard across Brittany and into eastern France, covering ground at a speed that felt unstoppable. Yet speed did not erase vulnerability. Inside an M4 Sherman, armor protection was limited compared to the German Panther. Crews knew this. They had heard stories of Shermans igniting after penetration, earning the grim nickname Ronson. But they also trusted their machines. The Sherman was mechanically reliable. It started when needed. Its turret traversed quickly. Its radio system allowed constant communication between tanks, a quiet but decisive advantage. Crew coordination became instinctive. Driver responding to shouted commands, gunner tracking shapes through fogged optics, loader feeding shells into the breach with practiced rhythm. Across the fields, German Panther crews carried a different burden. Many of the Panther brigades assembled in Lorraine were newly formed. Their tanks were formidable, but cohesion within units was uneven. Others were veterans pulled from depleted formations. The Panther's powerful gun inspired confidence, yet the tank itself required careful maintenance. Its transmission and final drive systems were complex and vulnerable to strain. Morale, too, differed in subtle ways. For American tankers, Ericourt was part of a forward drive, momentum, pushing them toward Germany. For German crews, it was a counterstroke born of retreat. They were ordered to prove that German armored dominance still existed. When the fog closed in and visibility shrank, human perception replaced long-range gunnery. Tank commanders leaned half-exposed from hatches, straining to distinguish friendly shapes from enemy silhouettes. Every sound mattered. Engine pitch, track clatter, a turret turning in the mist. In these moments, the battle was not abstract strategy. It was fear, training, and reaction compressed into seconds. And as the first shots echoed across Lorraine's ridges, the psychology of armor warfare began to reveal itself. From a German planning perspective, the American deployment near Ericourt appeared dangerously thin. Reconnaissance elements reported scattered tank companies occupying key terrain features, ridgelines, crossroads, and small villages. There was no visible mass of armor. No deep defensive trench systems. No dense anti-tank barriers. It looked like overextension. German commanders within the 5th Panzer Army interpreted this as opportunity. Their operational concept centered on concentrated armored thrusts. Panthers would advance in force, break through the American screen, and exploit toward operational objectives east of Nancy. Speed and shock would compensate for logistical fragility. But the American line was deceptive by design. U.S. armored doctrine emphasized mobility over static defense. Units were dispersed, yes, but they were linked by radio and supported by responsive artillery. Rather than forming a rigid wall, the 4th Armored Division functioned as a web. When one node encountered pressure, others could maneuver rapidly. Fog enhanced this illusion. German tank columns advancing through limited visibility struggled to maintain formation. Command and control became more difficult as visual contact between vehicles broke down. A powerful Panther was formidable in open, clear terrain. In dense fog and rolling farmland, that advantage narrowed. American crews, operating in smaller, flexible groups, often achieved local surprise. Shermans appeared suddenly at close range, firing from hull-down positions on reverse slopes. Tank destroyer units equipped with 76mm guns reinforced threatened sectors quickly. The German assumption of weakness collided with an unseen depth of response. What began as a calculated strike risked becoming a piecemeal engagement, Panthers encountering American armor not in a single decisive clash, but in a series of sudden, close-range duels. The illusion of fragility was fading. And beneath that fading illusion, a more dangerous realization was forming, one that would redefine the battle's trajectory. On paper, the German Panther held the advantage. Its 7.5 centimeters KWK-42L 70 gun could penetrate the frontal armor of an M4. Sherman at distances where the Sherman's standard 75mm gun struggled to respond effectively. In open country with clear visibility, the Panther was designed to dominate long-range engagements, but Ericourt was not fought on paper. The Lorraine countryside, layered in morning fog, reduced visibility to dangerously short distances. Engagements often occurred under 800 meters, sometimes under 200. At these ranges, the technical superiority of the Panther's long gun was partially neutralized. Reaction time and positioning became more important than raw penetration charts. American Shermans had advantages of their own. Their turrets traversed quickly. Their mechanical reliability allowed rapid repositioning. Most critically, every Sherman carried a dependable radio, enabling real-time communication between tanks and supporting units. German tanks were equipped with radios as well, but American doctrine emphasized decentralized initiative supported by constant communication. The U.S. 4th Armored Division also operated in coordination with attached tank destroyer battalions, many equipped with 76mm guns capable of penetrating Panther armor under favorable conditions. When Shermans encountered heavily armored opposition, tank destroyers could be summoned quickly. There was also the matter of maintenance. The Panther, though formidable, was mechanically complex. Its transmission and final drive components were prone to failure, particularly under sustained maneuver in difficult terrain. The Sherman was simpler and easier to repair. American logistical support, though strained, remained systematic. Disabled tanks could often be recovered and returned to service faster than their German counterparts. Thus, Ericourt became not a simple duel of gun versus armor, but a contest of systems, engineering philosophy, doctrine, and adaptability. In fog-shrouded fields where sightlines collapsed, technology alone could not decide the outcome. Leadership at Ericourt operated within layers of uncertainty. On the German side, General Hasso von Manteuffel of the 5th Panzer Army was tasked with restoring operational momentum in Lorraine. Manteuffel was experienced in mobile warfare. He understood the need for concentrated force and rapid exploitation. Yet he faced constraints: newly formed units, limited fuel, incomplete intelligence. Reports from reconnaissance suggested the Americans were thinly spread. That assessment shaped operational planning. German armored brigades were directed to strike aggressively, believing that a decisive blow could shatter forward American positions. But information in war is rarely complete on the American side. Major General John S. Wood of the 4th Armored Division fostered a culture of initiative. Subordinate commanders were encouraged to act quickly when encountering enemy forces, rather than waiting for centralized directives. American armored battalions often maneuvered independently within a broad operational framework. They maneuvered, they shifted positions. They called artillery fire onto suspected approach routes. They used terrain, ridgelines, reverse slopes, and village edges to offset German firepower. Leadership at the tactical level proved decisive. Company and battalion commanders on both sides had to interpret incomplete reports. Misinterpretation could lead to isolated units facing concentrated fire. For German commanders, the challenge grew as attacks failed to produce immediate breakthrough. Confidence in initial assessments eroded. Repeated engagements with what seemed to be small American forces revealed an unexpected depth of resistance. For American leaders, each successful defensive action reinforced belief that mobility and coordination could withstand heavier armor. The clash at Ericourt was not merely machines colliding. It was leadership decisions unfolding minute by minute, judgments made with limited visibility, both literal and strategic. Engines roared low through the mist as tanks moved in column along narrow farm roads before fanning out into open fields. Their objective was clear: crush the American screen east of the village and exploit the breakthrough. Forward units of the U.S. 4th Armored Division, Detected movement first by sound. American tankers positioned on ridgelines near Lisi and Juvilis. Visibility was so limited that shapes appeared only moments before engagement. Then, suddenly, silhouettes. Panthers, the first encounters were abrupt and violent. At distances sometimes under 300 meters, Shermans opened fire as soon as enemy outlines became identifiable. The Panther's long gun, designed for range, now operated in compressed space. Reaction speed determined survival. American crews maneuvered aggressively. Rather than holding fixed positions, Shermans shifted laterally along reverse slopes, firing and relocating before German gunners could stabilize aim. Artillery observers transmitted coordinates through crackling radios, bringing indirect fire down onto suspected German assembly areas hidden within the fog. German commanders attempted to maintain momentum. Orders emphasized pushing through resistance. The belief persisted that only light American forces stood ahead. But as Panthers advanced, they encountered not isolated tanks but coordinated pockets of resistance. In one sector near Ericourt, a small group of Shermans delayed a much larger German formation long enough for reinforcements to arrive. Additional American tanks maneuvered from concealed positions, appearing unexpectedly on the flanks of advancing Panthers. The fog distorted perception. German tank commanders, peering through optics clouded by condensation, struggled to determine the size of opposing forces. Every engagement felt larger than anticipated. American artillery fire suggested broader defensive preparation. By mid-morning, German attacks had failed to achieve a clean breakthrough. Instead of collapsing, the American line bent and reformed. And as the day progressed, what was intended as a decisive armored thrust began to fracture into separate, disjointed engagements across the Lorraine countryside, each one draining momentum from the offensive. Yet the fighting was far from over, because on September 20th, German command committed additional armored strength, determined to force the breakthrough that had eluded them, and the battlefield would grow even more chaotic. September 20th, 1944, the fog returned before sunrise. German command within the 5th Panzer Army resolved to renew the assault with greater weight. Elements of the 111th and 113th. The objective remained unchanged: rupture the American line, isolate forward units, and roll west before the U.S. Third Army could react in force. But the battlefield had already shifted. The previous day's engagements revealed something troubling. American resistance was neither accidental nor weak. The forward elements of the 4th Armored Division had not collapsed under initial shock. Instead, they maneuvered with fluid precision. German commanders now faced the dilemma of pressing forward through uncertain terrain against an enemy whose true strength remained unclear. Shortly after dawn, Panthers advanced again through mist-laced fields south of Ericourt. This time, American forces were prepared. Sherman crews had repositioned during the night, occupying hull-down positions behind ridgelines. Tank destroyer units, equipped with high-velocity 76 mm guns, covered likely avenues of approach. Artillery batteries were registered on key crossroads and open ground where armored columns would be forced to pass. When the German advance began, it encountered immediate resistance. At close range, Shermans fired rapidly, targeting side armor whenever possible. Panthers returning fire often struck ridgelines rather than exposed hulls. The terrain and limited visibility compressed engagement distances into chaotic, swirling fights where formations dissolved into individual duels. Several German units became disoriented in the fog. Tanks veered off course. Coordination between infantry and armor faltered. Without clear visibility, massed attack degraded into fragmented clashes. American radio communication proved decisive. Reports of contact moved quickly up and down the chain of command. Reinforcements shifted laterally across interior roads, arriving at threatened sectors faster than German planners had anticipated. What appeared from a distance to be a thin screen revealed hidden elasticity. By midday, losses among German Panthers were mounting. Some were knocked out by flank shots at close range. Others were abandoned due to mechanical breakdowns aggravated by rapid maneuver. Recovery under fire proved difficult. Burning hulks marked fields that hours earlier had been part of a confident advance. Crucially, the anticipated breakthrough never materialized. Instead of punching through the American line, German attacks stalled repeatedly against coordinated resistance. Each renewed thrust consumed fuel, ammunition, and irreplaceable armored vehicles. The operational momentum envisioned in planning rooms dissolved into tactical frustration. By September 22, the initiative had shifted. American forces began limited countermaneuvers, pressing against overextended German units. Panthers that had advanced expecting retreat now faced envelopment risks. Artillery concentrations intensified. The fog that once concealed German movement now masked American repositioning. The turning point was not a single explosion or dramatic charge, it was accumulation. Repeated failure to break through, unexpected American resilience, attrition without gain. The counteroffensive designed to restore German armored dominance in Lorraine had instead revealed its fragility. And as the smoke settled over fields scattered with disabled tanks, the consequences of that failure would ripple far beyond Ericourt. By late September 1944, the German counteroffensive in Lorraine, the Panther brigades committed near Ericourt had suffered significant losses, not only from direct tank engagements, but from artillery fire, mechanical breakdowns, and the cumulative strain of repeated assaults without decisive breakthrough. Precise loss figures vary among historical sources, but estimates indicate that German forces lost well over 100 armored vehicles during the broader Ericourt fighting, a substantial portion of their newly committed strength. For formations already struggling to rebuild after Normandy, these losses were crippling. The American 4th Armored Division also suffered casualties in tanks and personnel. Shermans were destroyed, crews were killed or wounded. The battlefield was littered with burned-out hulls bearing both Iron Crosses and White Stars. Yet the division remained operationally intact. Its structure had not collapsed. Its mobility endured. The contrast was strategic. German planners had hoped to destabilize the American advance and force a major pause. Instead, the counterattack expended valuable armored reserves at a moment when Germany could least afford such losses. Replacement Panthers were limited. Experienced crews even more so. Weather continued to complicate operations, grounding much Allied air support during the peak of the battle. Ironically, this deprived American forces of one of their most potent advantages. Yet even without consistent air superiority, use armored doctrine, flexible, radio-coordinated, supported by artillery, had proven resilient. The psychological effect was equally significant. For German armored crews, Ericourt challenged assumptions about technological superiority. The Panther remained a formidable machine, but battlefield dominance required more than armor thickness and gun length. Cohesion, reconnaissance accuracy, terrain adaptation, and command responsiveness all mattered. For American tankers, the battle reinforced confidence. They had faced Germany's newest armored brigades in conditions that favored surprise and confusion, and had not broken. The belief that mobility and coordination could overcome heavier armor was no longer theoretical. It had been tested in fog and fire. Strategically, the German failure in Lorraine ensured that the U.S. Third Army's advance would continue, albeit slowed by logistical constraints rather than enemy breakthrough. The Moselle line remained contested, but the opportunity for a decisive German reversal had passed. The battlefield around Ericourt became a graveyard of unrealized expectations, burned Panthers resting in fields they were meant to cross in triumph. And yet, even in defeat, German command did not abandon its broader ambitions in the West. The lessons of Lorraine would be studied, reconsidered, and folded into plans for a far larger gamble only months away. In the weeks following the fighting around Ericourt, operational realities became unavoidable. The German High Command had committed newly organized Panther brigades to a counteroffensive meant to restore initiative in Lorraine. Instead, the effort exposed structural weaknesses. Hastily assembled formations, though equipped with powerful tanks, lacked the cohesion required for sustained offensive maneuver. Mechanical attrition compounded combat losses. Recovery and repair under battlefield pressure proved increasingly difficult. Within the 5th Panzer Army, confidence in rapid armored counterstrokes diminished. The failure at Ericourt did not end German resistance in Lorraine, but it altered its character. Defensive preparations deepened. The emphasis shifted toward holding ground rather than reclaiming operational momentum. For the American 4th Armored Division, The battle reinforced doctrinal conviction: US armored warfare had not been designed around single-tank superiority. It depended on systems, communication networks, artillery coordination, flexible command authority, and logistical sustainability. Communication and shifting forces laterally to threatened sectors. Artillery support, rapidly concentrated through forward observers, repeatedly disrupted German assembly areas. Even in fog that grounded much close air support, American units maintained synchronized response. Casualty reports revealed the human cost. American armored battalions lost dozens of tanks over the course of the engagements, and crew casualties mounted. Each destroyed Sherman represented not only steel and fuel, but men, drivers, gunners, loaders, commanders, whose survival depended on inches of armor and seconds of reaction time. German losses were heavier in proportion to their committed strength. Panthers, often perceived as nearly invulnerable from the front, were found disabled by flank shots, artillery fragments, or mechanical breakdowns during rapid maneuver. Once immobilized, recovery under American fire was rarely possible. Strategically, the implications extended beyond Lorraine. The German command structure would later attempt a far more ambitious counteroffensive in December 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge. Lessons from Ericourt, particularly regarding coordination, surprise, and the limits of armored thrust without secure logistics, influenced planning debates. Even if they were not fully absorbed for American forces, Ericourt contributed to a broader understanding of German capabilities late in the war. The Wehrmacht remained dangerous, capable of assembling armored strikes even after catastrophic defeats. Underestimation was perilous. Vigilance was essential. By early October 1944, the fields around Ericourt had grown quieter. Burned-out vehicles were catalogued, wounded were evacuated. Replacement crews arrived to fill depleted ranks. The front shifted gradually eastward toward the German border, but the memory lingered, of fog-bound mornings when shapes materialized suddenly, of assumptions overturned by engine noise in the mist. Ericourt did not carry the scale of Normandy or the drama of later winter battles. Yet it marked a decisive moment when expectation collided with resilience, and in that collision, a quiet but significant truth about armored warfare in 1944 had been revealed. Ericourt stands as a study in perception, assumption, and adaptability. A German commander had smiled at what appeared to be a thin American screen. The promise of easy victory rested on visual observation and incomplete intelligence. Yet the battlefield is rarely static, rarely obedient to expectation. Mobility, communication, and human initiative reshaped reality in the fog of Lorraine. The battle illustrates the fragile interplay between technology and doctrine. Panthers were superior machines on paper, but their advantage diminished when terrain, weather, and dispersed opposition intervened. Shermans were outgunned yet not outmatched, because American tactics emphasized coordination over individual strength. In war, raw power alone does not decide outcomes. Integration of human decision-making in systems often proves decisive. The human element remains central. Young crews, operating in seconds of fear and instinct, turned mechanical tools into instruments of survival and influence. Leadership, at every level, dictated the rhythm of engagement, the direction of maneuver, and the resilience of each side. Commanders who read the battlefield accurately could amplify advantage. Those who misjudged paid the price in steel and lives. Strategically, Ericourt reinforced a larger truth. By late 1944, German armored might, though formidable, could no longer dictate events on the Western Front. Momentum had shifted. American forces demonstrated that tactical flexibility and integrated support could blunt even technologically superior opponents. Lessons learned in Lorraine echoed in future confrontations, shaping the calculus of commanders on both sides. And yet, beyond strategy and equipment, there is a human resonance. The mist-covered fields, the roar of engines, the sudden emergence of tanks through fog, these are moments when uncertainty, courage, and consequence collide. History remembers not only the movements of armies, but the human resolve that defines the outcome. Ericourt reminds us that in war, appearances deceive, smirks may falter, assumptions may crumble, and yet, through coordination, adaptability, and sheer determination, Even a small force can withstand the weight of expectation, leaving a mark on history that endures far beyond the battlefield.